But this on its own is like a massive change. But there's so many more things in these patch notes that I'm very, very interested in. Hey prospectors, today the patch notes for the Cycle Frontier 2.2.0 dropped, and you may think, oh yeah, whatever, it's a point release, like this isn't a big deal. But there's actually a lot of really interesting changes, including completely redoing the way that armor works. So we first have this couple little paragraphs, but the really big thing is in this very first thing. Armor and penetration now increase linearly, 5 per tier. If you didn't know about how armor worked previously in the Cycle Frontier, it was via a process called logarithmic instead of a process called linear. And what that means is the higher up you got in armor tiers, you'd get less additional benefit for each tier. So green would be a big jump over white, but blue would not be as big of a jump over green as green ones over white. This meant that armor felt not as great if you wore really high-end armor. The difference between purple and blue armor was very often 1 bullet, which is not a super big advantage. And this is a really nice goal because it allowed people who didn't have super good gear to have a chance. However, it also meant that it felt like armor wasn't that valuable. And so the developers at Jaeger have been trying to fix this for a while by figuring out how do you simultaneously make armor feel more meaningful while not totally screwing over people who don't have really good armor. And so this is a move back to, I believe it was closed beta 2, it was before I played, where armor worked linearly. So this is a really, really big change and is going to make fights and everything feel a lot different, I expect. We won't actually know until the patch drops tomorrow, but this on its own is like a massive change. But there's so many more things in these patch notes that I'm very, very interested in. They've also reduced the kmark prices of gear that is blue and above, so that's also very interesting, and we'll get into the specifics a little bit below. But these are the really, really, really big things that have changed. They've also changed how damage works as well, so that the tiers is slightly bigger as well there. So it's just basically a huge balanced patch to almost everything in the game. The second bullet point here is they've changed the way that the damage mitigation formula works. So that's also going to have a really big feel. We'll get into the specifics a little bit later, but these two things are massive. And as always, anti-cheat changes, very welcome. Can't say a lot about the details there because otherwise you help the cheaters. Now, here's the meat on the weapons and gear progression changes. So common armor is going to stay at the same 10 value, but uncommon went from 17 to 15, and rare went from 23 to 10, epic 27 to 25, exotic ends up staying the same, and legendary also ends up staying the same. So you see there's this 5 increase now instead of it being a slightly different amount. The difference between 23 and 17 was also 5, but 7 to 10 was 7. So you sort of have a smaller jump between green and white armor, the same jump from blue to green armor. Previously, epic to rare was only 4 points different, and now it's 5. So purple armor got basically a 1-point buff, relatively speaking. And exotic armor was only 3, and now it's 5. So it also got even though the number stays the same, it got a buff relative to its position and everything else. Here's the way that the mitigation formula changed. So there's a 5-point difference will get you from 11 to 13% damage reduction and amplification. And then there's a 10-point difference and a 20-point difference as well. So the example they give here is that if you have 15 pen versus 10 armor, it's now a 13% damage amplification. While if you have 10 pen versus 15 armor, it's now a 13% damage reduction. The white pistol is getting a small damage buff and reduced recoil. I still don't think anyone's going to actually use that. The bolty got a huge damage nerf from 57 down to 50. I haven't run the numbers yet exactly to see how that changes TTK on various armors, but expressly going down to 50 plus some damage reduction means maybe 2 shots for bolties are not going to be possible on higher armor anymore. And since that got nerfed, they took the price back down from 10,000 to back to 6,800 kmarks. So we'll see. Definitely people have been talking a lot about how the bolty needed a bunch of changes, and hopefully this will kind of help. I know there's also a lot of people that thought that the bolty was fine as it is. Just really depends on your playstyle, I think, and the way that different things work. So we'll see. The trench gun movement speed is now reduced by 10% when the weapon is drawn. So you'll see this later in the notes too, but this is effectively happening for all shotguns. It used to be that shotguns would not have any movement penalty with them out. Now you have this small movement penalty. So that's a really interesting change to the way that shotguns work. You see more people pull their knives out when moving primarily instead of including just the bolty. The Scarab has a buff, which is kind of cool. The refire time between bursts is dropping by a little bit. So this means you're going to be able to fire it faster, therefore more damage. Pretty cool. I really like the Scarab this season, and so I'm interested to see how it feels after this change. The The Maelstrom and Shattergun also receive that movement penalty, but the Shattergun also has its like damaged fall off distance reduced. So now it's at 20 meters instead of 30 meters. A lot of people have been saying the Shattergun is very OP, especially on Theros Island. It's like very clearly better than any of the shotguns in the game. So we'll see if this damage fall off change really helps in that regard. I won't read you out this long list of reducing buying prices of various blue to purple guns, but it's definitely very interesting. It seems like everything has dropped significantly, some by 10,000 credits, but once we get to the high end, like as much as almost 100,000 credits for Kinetic Arbiter, for example. So this should make a lot of these things a lot more accessible, which is really interesting. I mean, you still have to grind a ridiculous amount in order to get to level 20 on ICA to actually get a Kinetic Arbiter in the first place, but we'll see if they make changes about that anytime in the future, because if their goal is to make these things more accessible, by the time you've leveled ICA to level 20, for example, the 100 kmark difference is not going to be like that significant for you, I don't think. So this is like sort of an accessibility change, but I'm not convinced it's gone far enough if their goal truly is accessibility on the highest end of useful weapons. Same thing with the buying price of helmets and shields. Honestly, like these aren't that hard to craft in the first place, and once you're able to craft them, you probably have this much kmarks. I'm not sure how this is really going to affect the economy, but I'm not going to complain about gear being cheaper. You can charge your heavy melee attack while sprinting again. This is directly in response to outcry from the community. They didn't want the behavior to be the way it was originally, but everyone super loved it. So once they brought it back in line with their vision, everyone was kind of upset. And so they've decided to listen to the community and bring that back. I don't always think that listening to the community is the right way for a developer to make a game, to be clear. But I think in this particular case, I think it was the right call. This kind of thing was really loved by people, and while it's true that this enabled people to be able to like kill other people more often, I don't think that really happened unless you put yourself in a really bad spot anyway. If you're at a place where you're close enough to get knifed by a knife runner anyway, something has gone wrong. Either you haven't listened to your surroundings, or you've been making too much noise, or you were distracted, and this is kind of your punishment. So I don't think that I think this is a good time for Jaeger to listen to the community and bring back something that was beloved and, in my opinion, not really a problem when they tried to fix it anyway. So that's the major changes. However, there's still a lot of really interesting stuff down here in the bug fixes. So there's a lot of little tiny things about stuck places being fixed and all sorts of stuff about that, some color changes, and that's totally, fine and nice. But there's a couple things that I think are really, really interesting. One is you'll be able to properly access Badum's Codex now after you finish your tutorial missions. I was really interested to see this land in Season 2, and then the fact that we couldn't was kind of weird, so it's nice, and I'm really excited to see what that actually looks like now. The main culprit for Marauder teleporting at times got fixed. This was super, super big and like really a problem, and it's really annoying when you die to a Jeff that's teleporting, so I'm really excited that this is like now a thing. It always feels bad when you make a positioning choice and then you find out that actually secretly Jeff was standing somewhere else and you couldn't know it. Like those deaths always felt bad, so this is going to be a really, really great change. This one is really, really wild. Fixed an issue where bullets would sometimes ignore armor. This was something that people were reporting on places like Reddit, and people were saying, no, you must just be misunderstanding. You need to get good. Like, surely if this is a problem, Jaeger would have communicated it to us, and they didn't until they fixed it, which I think is probably the right call since they fixed it so quickly, but like it's pretty wild that this happened. Game dev is hard, that's just how it goes, but I'm glad they finally fixed it, and now this just makes me wonder like how many of my times that I were killed were because of this bug as opposed to my own decisions. There's just no way we're gonna know, so at least it's fixed now, so that's pretty great. Now we're on to the last part, known issues. The alien hunter vision is being adjusted to be more in line with the original intentions and be less overpowered than the iteration we had at the beginning of the season. We hope to re-enable that perk in the next patch if everything goes as planned. So we'll see. This definitely was a really, really controversial perk in the community, and I think part of that was due to the fact that it's so inaccessible to most players that there was kind of this telephone game effect. So a lot of people said initially, like, this gives you complete ability to see anyone anywhere on the map. And that wasn't like entirely true. So we'll see how the new version that's been adjusted is the case, and hopefully they clearly communicate how this perk works. I understand that they didn't want to talk about it a lot because they wanted it to kind of be like a discovery thing, but that also meant I feel like the community reacted to it very negatively because they weren't really sure how it worked, and a lot of people talked it up as being insanely overpowered, and it definitely was very strong, but I suspect that it wasn't as strong as many people were talking about it to be. But, we'll just see. The sparkling pool area on Theros Island is spawning too many mushrooms. This is really funny. I actually just commented on Reddit about this issue this morning. There's actually a quest that's something like deliver 25 mushrooms. And I was like, oh, that's going to take forever. And then I was like, wait a minute, there's that one spot on Theros Island in Sparkling Pools. So I suggest that tonight you go and grab 20 or 25 mushrooms and put them in your stash if you haven't done that already, because that's going to be a lot harder, I'm assuming. Now, it has a ridiculous amount of mushrooms, like 40 or 50 every time I've been there. And it also spawns in the purple mushrooms, even though there's not a storm. So that's also been a neat thing. I wonder if that's going to be changed and removed here, or whether that's going to be the same. They don't say anything specifically, but this still may spawn a lot of mushrooms, but just not like an absurd amount of mushrooms. Like, it took me 10 seconds to pick up 20 mushrooms last time I was there. So that was definitely a lot. All right, well, they say that's all we've got for you this time around, but this is definitely like a really, really huge set of notes, and I'm very excited to see when this happens. Maintenance is going to happen tomorrow morning, depending on what time zone it's in. Obviously, that might be different, but I think for most people in Europe and the US, at least, it's going to be morning. For me, it's like 4 a.m. in the morning, so I never really deal with the downtime, but they did say that it was going to take 3 hours for this downtime to happen. So if you're planning on jumping in right at reset, you're going to have to maybe give it a little bit of time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on Fortuna 3.